Thinking about the 5G network and about the 5G network of leadership. I sometimes ask the question, if you had one word to describe leadership, what word would you choose? I get many answers, good answers, such as vision, strategy, communication, such as stewardship, being a servant, being disciplined, having influence, all good words. I often would look for one word to describe leadership, and it was a word about the motivation or the why of leadership from the perspective of values. And that word is love, because God is love, and all good leadership flows out of His love. Then I was having a conversation with a friend, Zenit, from the Philippines, and I asked her what was her one word of leadership. And she said, leadership is stewardship. And that made me reflect that while love is the deep why of all leadership for the good of other people, that there is a stewardship that God gives to us in leadership. And I began to reflect on 5 aspects of that stewardship. And it is that we live for the glory of God, that the heart and the purpose is to see the manifest glory of God in ordinary things on earth, but ultimately to see His glory in all eternity with a people from every nation, every tribe, every language worshipping in a multitude that no one can count in eternity. In a sense, that's the vision that Abraham had when he stepped out, that he was living with that vision of a city whose builder and maker is God. And that was in his mind in each step, even though he didn't know where he was going on the immediate path. And then as he stepped out with the vision of God's glory through his own family for all nations, that he then walked in the grace of God, the undeserved favor of God. And that makes me think of Paul and how Paul writes to the Ephesians and he writes to the Colossians. And in chapter 3 of Ephesians, he speaks of this stewardship or administration of grace that God has given to him. And so leadership is a stewardship of grace for the glory of God. Those are the first 2 G's. First of all, it's a stewardship of His glory, clear sense of what is the end in mind, to make disciples of all nations. Secondly, it's a stewardship of a grace that's been given to us, and that is primarily the manifest presence of God in ordinary vessels of clay. And then thirdly, leadership is then recognizing that we have all been entrusted with certain gifts and capacity, training, abilities, life experience, but a deep gifting of the Holy Spirit that can work together to influence whole communities for their good. And so leadership is stewardship of God's glory in the grace of God, where we are stewarding that grace with the gifts that He's given us. And it requires a heart that is generous, a willingness to give everything for the good of other people. Then leadership flows out of a heart of gratitude, giving thanks to God. It's about His glory. He's given grace to us, entrusted us with gifts to serve for His purpose, the good of all people, and we give thanks to Him. Now you will have noticed as you listened that I've mentioned 6 G's. The overall G is the goodness of God in everything, but leadership is for the glory of God, in the grace of God, through the gifts that God gives, with much generosity of everything we have, to see thanksgiving and gratitude expressed towards Him, then we'll see the goodness of God in all things. This is leadership. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. We need to steward that responsibility.